This episode is brought to you by Peloton. Welcome to your Peloton Pilates era. Trusted by over 2 million members, experienced instructors with true Pilates expertise, offering classes for every level. Choose from 10 to 45-minute sessions with little to no equipment. Anytime, anywhere. And with the cross-training swivel screen, you can move seamlessly from cardio to mat. Press Pilates. Small moves, big impact. Find out more at onepeloton.com/Pilates. When you want your spring break to feel like... and your kids' pool day to feel like... and your hotel bed to feel like... ooh, and room service to feel like... because at Hilton, hospitality feels like...
Your cabana's ready. Would you like fresh towels?
it matters where you stay. Book now at Hilton.com. Hilton, for the stay.
Picture this, a curve in the road, a change in plans. Well, what do you say? With the all-new Audi Q3, the answer's always yes. Yes to adventure. Yes to escape. Yes to performance. Yes to comfort. Yes to right now. Because saying yes without hesitation, that's real luxury. The all-new Audi Q3, made for the yes life.
Welcome to Away the Podcast. It's Martin here, and we've got another edition of On This Week for you today, where we take a stroll down memory lane and reminisce about some of the major and maybe some of the minor events to have taken place on this week in the history of Sunderland AFC. And of course, joining me to do that this morning are two very fine chaps indeed. So first of all, we'll say good morning to Kelvin. Good morning, Kelvin.
Morning, and morning, listeners.
And I hope you appreciate I'm sharing out now. I'm coming to you first one week. I'm coming to Andrew first one week. I don't want to discombobulate anybody or, set
I
a
thought
hierarchy.
I thought you might have gone to Andrew first this week, given all the praise and fame that's been heaped upon him in the last 7 days. Yeah.
Yes, it turns out Andrew is very, very popular with our listeners through his smooth. What do you compare him to, Kelvin? Bob Harris?
Whispering Bob Harris. That's
nice.
who I feel I'm sharing a pod with.
Well, we'll also say good morning then to Whispering Andrew Smithson.
Hello, gents. The pair of yous, please seek help. There's something up with the pair of yous. Yes, apologies for people listening over the last few days. There's been various pods that I've managed to cough and splutter through. But I think I saved me best performance for last week. What would have been a historical podcast, I thought listeners might appreciate hearing what it sounds like to have the plague. So yeah, that was my thinking there. And I'm on the road to recovery now, thankfully.
Oh, Andrew, you're the maple syrup to me freshly baked pancakes. So yeah.
Should be Valentine's Day again, shouldn't it? Well, that's sort of the line. Cheers. You've used that before, haven't you, Kelvin? Andrew, you left us with a quiz question at the end of last week's episode. Oh, I left the listeners with your quiz question, I should say. So
yes, I can't even
repeat it.
Yeah, I can't even remember what happened at the end of the podcast. And just very quickly, Kelvin, it's not quite as florid, but I like you too. I've not got anything along the lines of maple syrup or anything, but in fact, you know what? I'm feeling so much better now. Martin, I like you as well. You're both lovely lads, and that is not the cold medication talk, and that's coming from the heart. The quiz question, that's what I'm here for, not to chat you two up. The quiz question, 17th of March 1996, which Sunderland player made their final appearance for the club during a win at Birmingham City? Now, I know you both know the answer because we were discussing it before hitting record. It was, of course, the striker, Phil Gray. So well done, anybody who knew that one.
And I always liked Phil Gray as a player. And Terry Butcher pursued him for ages and ages and ages from Luton, didn't he? I remember Eric Hall, the monster agent, was Phil Gray's agent. And he really played hardball with Terry Butcher that summer. And it looked for a long time like we wouldn't get him. Like Phil Gray had been at Spurs as a youngster, hadn't he? He'd gone to Luton, scored a lot of goals. And Terry Butcher had really pinpointed him as a striker. He wanted to lead the line for his sort of new look team. And eventually he got him for big money at the time. And he was obviously involved in that infamous car crash at the start of, before the season started, towards the end of pre-season after a game at Middlesbrough, which kind of derailed his season, didn't it? It sort of set back his whole Sunderland career. But he did come on and he did do well for us, Phil Gray. But then it kind of petered out in the Peter Reid era, and he wanted to leave, and it was a shame the way it ended for him, because I think he could have done good business for us the following season in top flight.
Martin, that's exactly why I like the look of this quiz question, because the way it ended under Phil Gray was quite interesting. Terry Butcher had been desperate to sign him, and I think Luton Town were chuffed that they had this very sellable asset, because I think they were struggling for money. So they were more than happy to let the agent try and drum up as much cash as possible and make Phil Gray this kind of saviour for the club's finances. This game in particular, his final appearance for Sunderland, it was one of those classic time teas afternoons. I remember watching it quite vividly in the living room at my mum and dad's. We won 2-0. Steve Agnew scored a good goal. Then in the second half, Andy Melville got a really good header in. And, regular listeners will know that Andy Melville is another one of our pod favourites. So that's his first mention of the week. He can tick that one off. So yeah, it was a 2-0 win for Sunderland. It took us top. It was our 7th win in the row. So it was quite important for the team. But as for Phil Gray, like you say, Martin, it was all a bit of a sad ending. He came on with about 10 minutes left as a substitute, but only lasted 5 minutes himself. He got a groin injury, and that forced him to need to be taken off. I don't think a substitute ever likes to then be substituted themselves. And it meant he was injured for like the final 13 games of the season. So we often talk about that year, Craig Russell being top scorer with 13, and how that is a slightly low total for a team that wins a division. But Phil Gray on 8 goals was our second top scorer, and maybe had he not been injured, he might have got a couple more between then and the end of the campaign. But like you, Martin, there's been a few times where I've gone back and I've thought, so why did Phil Gray leave? Because if you remember, certainly after Don Goodman left, he was the main man. He was like kind of our big star player for a period. And it seemed a bit odd that he then didn't get a crack with us in the Premier League. So I've done some digging, like as is my wont, to kind of remind myself of what happened at the time. And it turns out he left. He joined Nancy in France under what was being called at the time freedom of contract legislation. But we now know it a bit more now, is basically it was a Bosman. He went on a Bosman, which it was new at the time, wasn't it? It was quite uncommon. And I'm amazed that Peter Reid kept playing him for as long as he did, because seemingly during that final season, he made Reid aware that he was looking to move on. He has to be put on the transfer list. And I remember plenty of players, I'm sure you do too. You two do as well, sorry. Normally, that was it. If you said you didn't want to be part of it, you were bombed out. But Peter Reid kept faith with him and kept giving him games. I don't know if that was because he was desperate to convince him to stay. And it was only this injury that put an end to him in playing in that promotion run. And then in the summer, there's a few continental clubs looking to sign him. I think Munich, 1860, Feyenoord were credited with a link for him. There was 2 or 3 clubs in France. And yeah, that's where he ends up going. He ends up going to France, age 28. And at that point, believe it or not, financially, it made more sense for him than hanging around and going to the Premier League, which is just not something you would expect now. It's rare for players to go abroad these days, seeing that is the big payday. But back in 1996, that's what it was, and that was Gray's time at Sunderland at an end.
No, it's a shame, isn't it? And although that was his last league, or that was his last competitive appearance for us, he did play again for us at Roker Park a few months later. Either remember that game?
He didn't play in Dickie Ord's testimonial, did he?
He did.
He
He started in Dickie
he
Ord's
did.
testimonial before he left to go over to France. And I always, again, found that really strange because it was quite clear he was on going out the door and that. I don't know whether Peter Reid was trying to convince him to stay or whether. I'm sure we've spoken to him through Roker Report, and I can't remember what he said about his departure. But that Steaua Bucharest game, you look at the Steaua Bucharest lineup, and it's full of Championship manager legends. You got the likes of Daniel Prodan, the centre half, who was always a great sign on Championship manager back in the day. Marius Lakatus, Adrian Illy scored the goal. It was a 1-0 victory for Steaua Bucharest. But we had a sub came on, a trialist called Joel Taihi, a little centre forward who played up front in Ivory Coast lad, and that was his only appearance in Sunderlandshire. Peter Reid was desperately trying to get a striker in before the Premier League season, wasn't he? And I think with Phil Gray's departure, or imminent departure as it was at that point, he was trying desperately hard. But it's strange that if Gray was out of contract, he was still there at the start of August and playing in first team fixtures.
Yeah. Very peculiar.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when you look at Peter Reid's, the cut of Peter Reid's jib, as Andrew said, with anybody who didn't want to be on board. You know, you look at. I always remember what he did with Alan Johnson, Magic Johnson. I really liked him as a player, and I always felt like Reid would cut his nose off despite his face if you weren't in there. If you weren't putting your hand up and saying, I definitely want to be here. I liked Phil Gray, though. He was a clever, really clever, sharp goal scorer, wasn't he? He was like a fox in the box kind of player. I really liked him and could have seen him doing business at that time, but not to be.
No, he's a really sort of rounded striker. I would say you kind of look at him, there's not one thing he was absolutely exceptionally good at. He was just very good at everything. He had a little bit of pace, but not loads of pace. He could finish. He could score a variety of goals. He was quite clever with the ball and could make things happen as well. And he just added an awful lot to the attack. But no, it was a shame that he left. I didn't say I do think he could have done some good business for us in the Premier League the following season. But there we go. We will start this week's episode on March the 16th. Now, 1895, we had an FA Cup semi-final. This was a game against Aston Villa at Ewood Park. And if you cast your mind back a couple of weeks ago when the Port Vale game was arranged and people were complaining that it was an early kickoff and the travel arrangements and all that sort of stuff. And we've had a few things this season, like the Bournemouth game where it's been moved early for television and all that sort of thing. Well, this game, obviously, there was no live TV coverage back in 1895, but the kickoff time had been put back to 4:00, which made it a much more difficult trip for the Sunderland fans to get there than would normally be the case. And they put the price of admission up. It was normally 1 shilling. I think I'm reading this right. And they put it up to 7 shillings for this FA Cup semi-final. So as a consequence, only 200 Sunderland supporters actually made the journey to go and see the FA Cup semi at Ewood Park, which is astonishing. You kind of wonder what the motivation was behind those things. Change the kick-off time, charge a sevenfold increase on match admission prices. Sunderland got off to a good start. Jimmy Hannes scored after 7 minutes to put Tom Watson's side ahead. But in the second half, Steve Smith scored a couple of goals in a 15-minute spell, or a 20-minute spell rather, to give a 2-1 win to Aston Villa. It wasn't all bad news, though, because we won the league that year, so a little bit of a consolation. But it was a very early example of the fans being taken completely for granted and the people who were ruling the purse strings not really giving a toss about the impact on supporters. 1908. This is another example of Sunderland having firsts in football. Sunderland's Lee Richmond Rouse, the goalkeeper, and we've spoken about him a number of times. He was playing for Wales and he was injured, and he became the first player to be replaced by a substitute in an international game. So this was a Wales versus England game at Wrexham, and Roos got injured and Di Davis of Bolton came on as sub to replace him. And yes, he was the first player to be subbed in international football. So there you go.
Bloody hell, Di Davis's career lasted a long time, didn't he? I think I saw him play.
You don't look that old, Kelvin. Come on. 1974, Tony Towers made his debut in a 1-0 home win over Fulham. Dennis Longhorn got the goal. 1985, this was a week before the Milk Cup final. Sunderland and Norwich were both struggling down the lower reaches of the top flight, and we had a Wembley encounter to look forward to 7 days later in the Milk Cup final. We travelled to Carrow Road. There's a bit of a dress rehearsal, and we won 3-1, Kelvin.
We did.
This was the first time that we'd scored 3 goals in a away league game for almost 2 years. Ian Wallace, Dave Hodgson, and an own goal from Greg Downs got the goals for us. And Gary Rowell came on as a sub for Norwich that day.
For Norwich,
But
yeah,
the
yeah.
mood must have been pretty good after that game in advance of the Milk Cup final a week later.
Do you know it was an odd game that I was at that game, Martin? I don't know if I'd mentioned it before. I did. I went to that game, and it was weird on a number of counts. There was just 13,000 at the game. It was the week before Wembley, and there wasn't a big crowd there. There was a canny Sunderland following, but not many Norwich fans in their ground. And yeah, you're right. Gary Rowell came on as sub. I mean, three goals were just. It had been a terrible season for by the League Cup run, and the 3 goals you were thinking, well, hey, here we go. We didn't play that great, but neither did Norwich. It seemed like a dress rehearsal in more ways than one, although there were Norwich. Steve Bruce didn't play for them. Him and Davy Watson were the linchpins at the centre-back pairing, and Bruce didn't play that day, so he was obviously saving himself for the big event. But the thing that I always remember about that game, apart from the 3 points and the goals, was obviously Ian Wallace played instead of Colin West. That wasn't a popular decision, and Sean Elliott's booking put him out of the game the following week. He got booked. I think it was just before half time. Well, it was a weird event. I had gone there because I'd been to Norwich a few times and always found those games quite raucous, found their crowd quite, there'd always be 20-odd thousand in, and be quite a boisterous crowd, but really weird response from the Norwich fans to that dress rehearsal. It wasn't a dress rehearsal, though, was it? we were terrible at Wembley.
They might have lulled us into a false sense of security on that occasion, mightn't they? In the Norwich team that day, there was a player who played for Sunderland in the last ever game, the farewell to Roker Park game against Liverpool?
I
You know who
know
that
the
is?
answer to this. So
I think Andrew does
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
He's chomping at the bit.
yeah,
I'm happy for you to take this one, Kelvin.
it was a young Chris Woods played in goal for
Chris Woods did play in goal,
Norwich
yeah.
that day. Yeah, and no fault on him for the. He was a good young goalkeeper, Chris Wood.
He was a very good goalkeeper, and I would still like to see how that season would have played out just over 10 years later if we chucked him in goal for the last 10 games. But again, that's another sliding doors moment that we will never know what would have happened. 1994, we talked about Phil Gray at the top of the show, and Phil Gray was on the score sheet as Sunderland beat Crystal Palace 1-0 at Roker Park. And there was a future Sunderland striker leading the line for Crystal Palace that day, and a future Sunderland manager in defence.
Coleman.
Oh, you got
Maybe
Chris Woods
manager-
easy, didn't you? And quickly, but you're not leaving on this one.
Coleman for the manager, maybe?
Chris
Chris
Coleman
Coleman?
was in the centre of Crystal Palace's defence that day. That's right.
And a
I do
future
like these
Sunderland
questions. I do like
And
these questions, Martin. They keep us on
1994.
our toes.
The striker who was playing for Palace that day, it's a difficult one because you wouldn't necessarily relate him to Crystal Palace. He must have been on loan at Palace on that occasion.
Ooh.
Remind me of the year, sorry, 94, did you say?
94, yeah.
Played for Palace on loan and then came to us. What year did he join us, like?
I'll give you another clue. He originally came on loan to us a year later.
Not Paul Stewart, is it?
Paul Stewart, indeed. Paul
In a
Stewart
way,
was up front
yeah.
with Crystal Palace on that
Clever.
occasion. And 3 years later, Paul Stewart came off the bench at Stamford Bridge, as did Alex Ray, and both of them scored. Sunderland got beat 6-2 in this game. This was the first time that more than one sub had scored in the same game for us. So Alex Ray and Paul Stewart both came off the bench. I'm sure that game was live on TV. I remember watching that one. And yeah, both subs scored goals. March 16th, 2015, Gus Poyet was sacked. And I know Gus Poyet was in town at the weekend. Tom White was doing a talk-in with him before the Brighton game. And yeah, 16th of March, so he's almost, 11 years to the day. He was sacked. He got his P45. He managed 60 Premier League games. And this is really interesting. He actually had a better away record than he had a home record. So in 60 Premier League games, he only won 7 at the Stadium of Light, drew 10 and lost 13. Away, he won 7, drew 11 and lost 12. So he got a point more away from home than he did at home, which I found really surprising when I looked at his record, because you'd naturally assume that you'd get more points at home, wouldn't you? But that was not the case under Gus Poyet. And of course, we had some good wins at the end of that season with the Chelsea game and Manchester United game and things like that, didn't we? That probably swayed that a little bit, that run in the Great Escape. But
Yeah, it was very enjoyable, that, wasn't it?
Oh, it's a weird one, isn't it? Because it was so enjoyable, but you would never want to be in the position where you have to do that, and it is so enjoyable. So it's almost a double-edged sword, but it turned out pretty well on that occasion. But we were certainly living by the sword around that time, and ultimately we died by it. March 17th, 1906, Sunderland beat Birmingham 3-1 at Roker Park. Arthur Bridger, Dennis O'Donnell and Joe Shaw with the goals. Jimmy Gemmell was sent off. And this was actually a benefit match for Billy Farquhar, who played 198 games and scored 17 goals for us. And they seem to have benefit matches as part of the league game, so that a league game is just nominated as a benefit game for the players' testimonial game, or if a player was going to retire, and they got they seem to get an agreed amount from the gate receipts of that game. There's another example of this to come with a game for Charlie Buchan. 1913, Sunderland played an FA Cup fourth round second replay away at Newcastle St James's Park. George Holly got 1 goal and Jackie Mordew got the other 2 as we beat them 3-0 to go through to the 5th round. And of course, we got to the final that year, didn't we, in 1913, only to be beaten by Aston Villa. 1920, we beat Sheffield United 3-2 at Roker Park. We were 3-0 up. Charlie Crossley, Barney Travers and Charlie Buchan put us 3 up before Sheffield United got 2 back to make it a bit of an interesting game. And this one was a benefit match for Charlie Buchan, so he was guaranteed £500 from the gate receipts, regardless of the attendance. 1956, we had an FA Cup semi-final at Hillsborough, got beat 3-0 off Birmingham. 1973, Dave Watson and Ron Guthrie scored goals, Kelvin, against Luton Town in the FA Cup quarter-final.
Well, I can still see Dave Watson's head. I would still be travelling yet if the net hadn't been there to stop it, man. He spanked that ball. But Ron Guthrie, he used to score lots of goals in training, Ron Guthrie.
Oh, really?
For a fullback. Apparently, Bob Stoker used to joke about it, that Guthrie was always gnashing up front and putting goals in on the training pitch, and the goal he scored. Hey, I tell you, it's odd that we've just been speaking about him. It was like something Phil Gray would have scored. He took the ball in the box, spun. He had his back to goal, took the ball in the box, spun, and absolutely wellied it into the back of the net. It was a cracking goal from Guthrie, but Davy Watson's header, my God, he didn't half hit that. Luton, hey, you're going to ask a question about Sunderland connections in that Luton team, aren't you? I can see it in your face.
I wasn't going to ask the question, but I have got it written down, so you can
right.
Fill the blanks in that one, Kelvin.
Yeah. Well, Viv Busby, played for Luton that day. They would play them the week before, which is just what we've been talking about with Norwich, and we played them the week before and got beat. And I always remember in the paper after that game, apparently Bob Stoker had been absolutely furious at the Luton manager, Harry Haslam, because of the way that he was celebrating and crowing about beating Sunderland as he was being interviewed, So, they had some good players in that team as well. John Aston, Jim Ryan, Busby, obviously. They had some good players, Luton, but it was a bit of probably of all the games in the cup run, it was almost like they just didn't turn up, and we beat them hardly getting in. We're probably in third gear in that game, It was a weird game, massive crowd in, but no, I can still see Davy Watson's header. It was what am I going to say to you? I was in the Roker end for that game. If the net hadn't have been there, it would have hit us in the face. So it would.
No, it's funny you mentioned Viv Busby. I was watching the big match revisited last night, and Viv Busby was playing for Norwich in a game against Leicester, and he scored a hat-trick. And it were quite extended highlights. It was probably about 25 minutes worth of highlights, and I think that's the first time I can remember actually seeing Viv Busby play rather than just scoring goals. And he looked an exceptionally good forward, and he scored a hat-trick, and he finished all 3 of them off absolutely beautifully. He was done out with another goal, mind as well. It was over the line. The referee didn't give it. Obviously, there was no watch that was buzzing on his wrist or goal line technology back in those days, and he's had to get on with it. 1996, we talked about Phil Gray's last game, a 2-0 away win at Birmingham. Steve Agnew and Andy Melville with the goals. Barry Fry was in charge of Birmingham. And here's another question for you, since you like them so much today. There was a future Sunderland captain in the Birmingham team.
In 1996.
1996.
Was he a defender by any chance?
Defender. He was indeed. He also had a very short spell at Inter Milan.
Oh, well, that's thrown me off the scent.
No, I think you're on the right. I think you're on the right scent.
Okay. I've got a name, Kelvin, but I'm happy to leave it to you if you've... I think he was involved in another promotion. Was it Gary Breen?
Gary Breen, indeed.
Ah. Well, didn't he then, at the end of the year, score... I think he scored one of the goals that mathematically ensured we got promoted, because didn't we get promoted without playing on a Saturday, and then our game was on the Sunday? I seem to think that's how it panned out eventually in 1996.
Yeah, right.
I've
I can't quite.
sorry, I've done you dirty there, Martin. I've left
No,
you
no.
flapping, but I seem to think that he scored a goal perhaps against Derby on the Saturday, and that was enough to mean we were mathematically guaranteed promotion.
And I
No, it's
didn't mind him for us, me. I thought Gary Breen was okay for us.
No, he was. I think he probably suffered, didn't he, for that start that we had, where he came and he was made captain immediately. We lost the first couple of games of that season, and it took him a little while to kind of get the crowd back. It was interesting at the Inter Milan stuff. So I'm sure he had a trial over in Italy, or he'd gone over to Italy as a youngster. But after the 2002 World Cup, where he'd starred for Ireland, and the song was "We All Dream of a Team of Gary Breens," both Inter Milan and Barcelona wanted to sign him.
All right.
And he'd gone over to Inter Milan and pretty much agreed a contract, but he failed the medical, and he disputes it to this day that there was nothing wrong with him, and the doctor was an idiot, and he shouldn't have been practicing medicine because he didn't have a clue about things, and that whole deal fell through. So it could have been a very different turn of events in the early 2000s for Gary Breen if that one had come off. 1997 was a glorious deal, although it was probably 10 years too late. Chris Waddle eventually signed for Sunderland, and it was a strange one, this, wasn't it? Because Waddle had been playing for Falkirk, and then he got to Bradford, and he scored a brilliant goal in the FA Cup for Bradford against Everton from miles out. We'd been linked with Chris Waddle pretty much every summer since, 93, I think, was the first year we tried to get him. Terry Butcher tried to get him. Peter Reid tried to get him, and we could never, ever get the deal over the line. And he came in as a bit of a roll of the dice from Peter Reid to try to keep us up in the Premier League, didn't he? And he added an awful lot to this. I even now still remember those matches he played, the game against Nottingham Forest, which we'll come on to later. The other games he played, obviously the Everton one, the last game at Roker Park, the last league game, really stands out with that free kick as well. But he just didn't, or he wasn't able to inspire the team to do enough. But it was still a great thing to see Chris Waddle playing in Sunderland shirt at Roker Park for us, I think, wasn't it?
I loved him. I mean, you could sometimes be a little bit wary about these older players coming, and I wasn't sure when we eventually got him. I wasn't 100% sure beforehand, having been a big fan of him in his younger days, given where he'd been, as you say, at Falkirk, and he hadn't exactly set the grass on fire at Falkirk, I can tell you, and Bradford, but I just thought he just brought a bit of pizzazz and a bit of light to the show, didn't he? Thank God.
I remember crying when I heard the news on whether the ITV breakfast was TV AM or whatever it was back in those days, when they announced Chris Waddle was leaving Spurs to go to Marseille, because he was my favourite football player. I used to love watching whenever Spurs played live on TV. I used to love watching him, and fortunately I was a bit too young to remember him playing for Newcastle, so I had no real connotation of him playing for Newcastle. I just knew he was from the Northeast. He was a Sunderland fan as a kid, and he was playing for Spurs, playing for England, and I adored him. Used to adore. I tried to grow a mullet it never worked. Thankfully, because some of the pictures looking back would have been horrendous. But I remember crying when he left, and he went to Marseille, and he was fantastic for Marseille. I remember watching the worst European Cup final of all time, Marseille versus Red Star Belgrade, I think in 1990. Marseille win 1-0, Belgrade win 1-0. It was an awful, awful game.
Awful, yeah.
There's a video that I had of Chris Waddle's time at Marseille, and Chris Waddle puts on the most horrendous French accent to narrate this whole video. You think Joey Barton's French accent was bad back in the day. this one that Chris Waddle had was right in the Steve McLaren school of accents. It was so bad it was good. But yes, Chris Waddle had a very short stint at the club, and I actually still think we should have kept him for that first season at the stadium. Did he go to Burnley as player manager? I got a feeling he did, didn't he, that summer? But I wish we'd kept him that next season.
Yeah, the Taulo sausage maker.
That's right.
I don't know what I can add to that. The Taulo sausage makers.
Well, he could have made mincemeat of defenders next season.
Hey,
Could have that.
I tell you, that's a fair point, Martin, because I think you look at the record books and assume, oh, well, he's been offered a player manager role. That makes sense as to why he left. But I think that came long after the decision from Reed to release him. I think, like you, I was surprised because we'd pursued him for years. He came to Sunderland a lot later than we wanted him to. And then he left a lot sooner than he wanted to because he was one of the best players in the world for a point, and he still had that magic. And yet I felt a pretty big element of shock when he was allowed to leave. I thought you were going to say that's when you were crying, Martin. You know, when you're in your, you know, you're well past your boyhood years by that point, and because Sunderland have made me cry plenty of times when I've been too old to have known better, really. But it was a peculiar one because those couple of months when he was in a red and white shirt, it felt like it was meant to be.
No, it did. It was 1991, this European Cup final, and Red Star Belgrade won in penalties 5-3. So yes, it was a horribly boring, dull game, that one. And yeah, Chris Waddle did his best. I don't think Waddle took a penalty, which obviously a year after his infamous one in the World Cup semi-final. So that was probably a good thing. 2007, Sunderland beat Hull City 2-0 under Roy Keane. Johnny Evans and Stern John scored the goals. 2015, the day after Gus Poyet was sacked, Dick Advocat was named as temporary manager until the end of the season. And in 2021, Ross Stewart made his debut, came on for Jack Diamond off the bench at half-time and scored pretty much straight away to give us a 1-0 lead, and Charlie Wagg got the other goal to seal a 2-0 victory. We'll take a very short break there, and we'll be back after a couple of ads.
Kayak gets my flight, hotel, and rental car right, so I can tune out travel advice that's just plain wrong.
Bro, Skycoin. Way better than points.
Never fly during a Scorpio full moon.
Just tell the manager you'll sue. Instant room upgrade.
Stop taking bad travel advice. Start comparing hundreds of sites with Kayak and get your trip right.
Bad advice? You talking to me?
Kayak. Got that right.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
Did you know only 6% of people are getting enough fiber? That's why Quaker created Fiber February, a month-long movement to show your gut a little more love. It's like dry January, only easier and more delicious. Quaker has over 100 delicious options that are a good source of fiber. So go buy Quaker Oats today and join the Fiber February movement for a healthy gut.
Welcome back to How We're the podcast for another episode of On This Week, and we are in the week that starts on the 16th of March and runs through to the 22nd, and we are going all the way back to 1939 now, March the 18th. Sunderland beat Chelsea 3-2. Bill Robinson got 2 of those goals and Rach Carter got the other. 1967, Colin Suggett made his debut for Sunderland against Stoke City. We got beat 3-0 at the Victoria Ground. And here's one for you, Kelvin. The opening goal was scored by a player who would go on to sign to Sunderland next season. Do you know who that was?
Calvin Palmer.
Got it in one. Calvin Palmer. Well done. 1977, Jimmy Montgomery moved to Birmingham City on a free transfer. He'd had a loan spell for a month in the weeks preceding that, but only 4 years after the FA Cup run that we were talking about a little bit earlier, he departed the club, and he actually went on to still have a bit of football left in him, didn't he? He was famously on the bench for Forest in the European Cup exploits and got a winner's medal under Brian Clough there, and he was probably could have stuck around for a little bit, Kelvin.
I think he play over 70 games for Birmingham. He was quite highly regarded there. And then obviously Cloughy knew what he was doing, didn't he? He needed a reliable backup, and off he went to Forest, and he's got his European Cup medal, 1980, wasn't it? The European Cup, 1980, and he's got that sitting in his trophy cabinet. Good old Jimmy.
He's still only 33 at this point, which is exceptionally young for a goalkeeper now. And goalkeepers back then still went and played for a good number of years. Didn't Pat Jennings play in his 40s, and so did Peter Shilton and players like that. So there was still an awful lot of football left in him, but that was it for Monty.
I think it says something about how young he was when he first came into the team. A lot of goalies, a lot of I'm generalising here, but goalies tend to start a little bit later, don't they, generally? But he was young coming into the team, and once he got in, I mean, the amount of games that he played, for us, once he got in, he was rarely shifted from the number one spot, and he's played an awful lot of games over the years that he was with us. I've lost the number. Is it 400?
627.
627. Yeah,
it's an incredible number of games, really, isn't it?
And it's sorry, I'm cutting across you there, Martin. For me, I'm always struck by when you're looking at the records and looking at teams. It's the amount of games where it's just his name is not in number one, and you can turn that page in your absolute record, and it just keeps going Montgomery. He just had tremendous fitness. His ability to keep himself on top, right at the top of his fitness and on top of his game. A model professional, I'm told he was. I've seen that written a few times about him. Yeah.
He did come back to the stadium, right? He did come back to Roker Park later in that season to play for Birmingham. Sunderland won 1-0 with a Mel Holden goal 7 minutes from the end. It was I'm full of quiz questions today. It was a future Sunderland manager playing in defence for Birmingham that day ahead of Monty.
Oh, man. I was at that game. Oh, yeah. Future Sunderland manager. It wasn't Mick McCarthy, was it?
No.
He didn't play for Birmingham, no. Oh.
77, did you say? What was the year, sorry?
1977, yeah.
Oh.
He was at Sunderland for quite a while as a coach, youth team coach, reserve team manager.
Sabrasia.
Yeah.
I was just Ricky Sprazier, man.
Ricky Sprazier was at the back for Birmingham that day. They had a good team. Howard Kendall was in the lineup. Trevor Francis was in the lineup. And obviously we've got promoted the season before. We're playing in top flies. Birmingham in top flies. We sell them Monty. We go down. Birmingham comfortably stay up mid-table. So you can read into that what you want, but it might not have been the wisest decision. A year later, we were obviously back in the second division. We played Mansfield, beat them 1-0. Bob Lee scored the goal, and Billy Bingham was in charge of Mansfield that day. So there was another potential quiz question there, but I saved you from it. 1992. This was, as Chris always likes to remind us, this was Sunderland's last FA Cup win at Roker Park. We talked about the Chelsea game with Anton Rogan's beautiful vest in last week's episode. Obviously, we brought him back to Roker Park. And this was such a good game. This is one of the best games for atmosphere I can remember at Roker Park. Obviously, Kelvin, you've got the FA Cup run of 73 and some of the famous games that'll stand out. For me, this was Roker Park at its best. Nighttime game, white hot atmosphere. We obviously went in front early on through Peter Davenport, and it was such a funny side, wasn't it? Because we were struggling a bit in the league. We were struggling to put performances together at this point. We'd started the year off pretty well under Martin Crosby, but against top flight clubs in the FA Cup, we'd gone to West Ham and beaten them 3-2. We'd gone down to Stamford Bridge and got a relatively late equaliser to get that tie back to Roker Park. We go in front through Peter Davenport, who was playing because Don Goodman's cup ties. And we're holding out. And Dennis Wise, horrible Dennis Wise, gets a scrappy goal in the full well end. Very late on, you think, that's it. And there was that air of despondency kind of fell on Roker Park. Everyone's quiet, and the game restarts, and we get a corner kick at the right-hand side of the Roker end, and Brian Atkinson swings it in. It's the last kick into the game, isn't it? And Armstrong just rises up and powers a header in, and that goes. My ribs are still bruised, I reckon, from getting pushed against the barrier in the full well end that night. But what a night that was!
Compare the atmosphere. I mean, there wasn't the numbers in when you're saying about the 73 Cup run, and I think of the games the year after against Derby in the League Cup were fantastic games, under the lights. But there's just something about playing under the lights at Roker Park for atmosphere, and that game was a rip snorter of a game. But you're dead right, the wisest goal, and it had to be him as well.
No,
he was another Leighton James character, wasn't he? But he hated Dennis Wise, mate.
Well, he never had any Sunderland redemption, did he? He topped up by going to Newcastle as director of football or something.
Yeah. Well, that's why you dislike him even more. Yeah, he just scrapped that goal in. But apparently, I don't know where I've got this from, and you might be able to tell me. Apparently, that goal that Gordon Armstrong scored was something that they used to rehearse in training. It wasn't just an abstract kind of, let's just hide that ball in and see what happens. Apparently it was something, I just remembered where it was in when Malcolm Crosby was interviewed on the pod. He said that, I think, that the goal was, and he said, I used to be speaking to them too and saying, that'll never work. So you're wasting your time doing that. He just rose. He just seemed to rise out of nowhere, didn't he, Armstrong, that night? Brilliant. He had those goals in him. He was very good in the air, wasn't he?
So strong.
And it was just, it was fantastic. I don't think I switched the car on to drive home that night. I think I just got in it and floated all the way back to the Scottish borders in my car. It was fantastic, fantastic gear under the lights.
Lads, unless you're about to mention it, Martin, were you going to talk about who Chelsea's manager was that night?
I wasn't actually, but it's a good one to throw into the mix, isn't it?
I was going to say, I think the fact that Ian Porterfield had a big part in our two best post-war cup runs is quite an interesting quirk. You might not have enjoyed the 92 version quite as much as involvement in the 73 era. But yeah, that was something that always, I don't know, just piqued my interest that Porterfield was in charge of Chelsea on that famous night.
No, it was funny, wasn't it? Because wasn't he in charge of Reading a few seasons earlier when they knocked us out the FA Cup in the third round?
Yeah.
That would have been 80.
Was,
88? No, 89.
Yeah, that sounds right. Well done. Aye.
Yeah,
good point, Martin.
I think Reading were fourth division, if not third division.
Ooh.
So they were certainly a league below us. And I remember it was one of Tommy Lynch's rare outings for us. But yeah, Ian Porterfield was in charge then. And I'm sure that when Dennis Smith got sacked earlier in that season, Porterfield was named as one of the favourites to take over. There was a few. Neil Warnock was famously close to taking the job, and he turned it down because his friend Malcolm Crosby was in the position, and he didn't want to come in when Crosby was still on the FA Cup run, which of course then lasted and lasted. But Ian Porterfield was very high up the betting, and there was a feeling that he wasn't. There was a feeling that Chelsea wouldn't have been too sorry if we made an approach for him to take him back to the northeast. So it could well have been Ian Porterfield in the Sunderland dugout as manager on that night, rather than the opposition dugout. But there you go, another sliding doors moment, which we will never know how it would have turned out. Talking about FA Cup replays, Kelvin, we're going to go back to 1967 and finish off the trilogy of games that ended up with the third game, the second replay, being played on a very neutral venue.
Don't get me started about that neutral venue. You're just throwing me blimmin', what's the neutral venue, my backside.
Wind it up and let you go.
Well, I mean, for the people that don't know, we'd played 2 rip snorter games against Leeds in 1967 in the FA Cup. And the first one at Roker Park, you know, a full house. You're talking about games under the, FA Cup tie, full house, over 55,000. Leeds, one of the, were on their way to be becoming one of the top teams in the country. The game ends up a draw. Bobby Kerr got his leg broken in that game. You can actually see highlights of that game on, if you stick that in your search engine. Match of the Day has some fairly extensive highlights of that game, the first game at Roker Park. It goes to a replay. We go down to Ellen Road. They get their biggest crowd. I think it's still their biggest crowd ever for that game. It's an eventful night on and off the pitch. We spoke about it last week. Leeds do come out to play a bit more. There'd been some shithousery and shenanigans from them at the game at Roker Park. They were becoming a team that was known for that kind of time wasting, fouling, play acting, going down, haranguing the referee. This was all new stuff in such an organised way. It seemed like it was a strategy from the team rather than just an individual who was hot-headed, So
you would have thought, Kelvin, after the reaction of the Leeds fans a week or two ago, that they'd always been angels and had never indulged in any sort of tactics like that or any sort of shithousery, wouldn't you, Bush?
Well, I don't know how old you have to be to appreciate that they actually bloody invented all that stuff, it just made me laugh last week, I was thinking, well, where have you been all your lives? Do you know your team's history,
Yeah.
Bloody hell.
Lack of self-awareness was astronomical, but
yeah.
Another conversation altogether.
To see yourself as others see you, the Rebbe plan, the Rebbe master plan. Anyway, these 2 games, whatever you've got to say about Leeds and their tactics, they've been 2 cracking games for one reason and another. But the third game would be played, and those 2 games were played within a week. Remember, we're talking about an era where if the cup tie was drawn on the Saturday, you probably had to play that on the Tuesday or the Wednesday afterwards. And because the second game was drawn, they agreed that there would be a third game at a neutral venue at Boothferry Park, Hull. I mean, I know we're laughing about it, but there was nothing neutral about Boothferry Park. Hull, I think Leeds had an hour trip to get to the ground, and for a lot of fans, middle of the week, that trip would have been a 3-hour trip to get to Bloomin' Hull at the time. What was it, 55 miles for Leeds fans to travel from Leeds, and 140 miles for Sunderland fans to get there from Sunderland. Never mind Mortis, where I travelled from, although going to that game was I was never in the running I wasn't old enough to be able to, at that time, to be able to say I was staying at a friend's house to me mum and dad, which I would have done a few years later. I would have done it because the game at Roker Park definitely hooked me up. It is one of my memories. It's a bit like your memory of Gordon Armstrong scoring that goal against Chelsea in that game. That Roker Park game's one of my memories. Anyway, we're on this 3-game odyssey. We go in between times. We play a league game, and we're sort of struggling in the league a bit. Leeds weren't, but we were, and we get humped 3-0 at Stoke, and as we said earlier, Calvin Palmer scores one of the goals. But we rest. There's players carrying knocks and for that league game, but they will come back for the cup tie in the middle of the week after the Stoke game. So Sunderland's team, just to put that to bed, there was no change to the starting 11 from the game at Elland Road, but Colin Suggett replaced John Park on the bench. I think he made his debut in the game at Stoke, Suggett. So Mulhall, Hurd, Baxter, Harvey, Cannell, who were all missing in the 3-0 defeat at Stoke, they came back. Leeds were without a good winger they had called Albert Johansson. He was injured and didn't play in this game. But his place was taken by another good player, Terry Cooper. And Cooper was an interesting player. For the people that remember him, they'll tell you he was he was a footballer, but he could play football, Cooper, but he could play like fullback, he could play left wing. He was quite an adaptable player, Cooper. Very clever player. I always liked him. He played at Middlesbrough for a while as well, Terry Cooper. And so Cooper came into the team, and Paul Madeley took the sub spot on the bench. So Sunderland's team for this game was Montgomery, Irwin and Harvey. Martin Harvey played fullbacks. Todd, Cannell and Baxter with a half-back line. And Alan Gowden had come in for Bobby Kerr. Alan Gowden was another young player, had come in for Bobby Kerr on the right wing. And John O'Hare, Neil Martin, George Hurd and Geordie Mulhall. And as I say, Colin Suggett was on the bench. Leeds had a team, the names in this team will interest people in terms of even by 1973, there was a good number of this Leeds team were playing in 1973 and around in 1973. So Gary Sprake played in goals. Willie Bell and Paul Reaney were the fullbacks. Billy Bremner, Jackie Charlton, Norman Hunter were the halfbacks. Peter Lorimer was on the wing. We'll come back to Lorimer later. He had some things to say about this game. And future Sunderland player Rod Belfort played up front for Leeds in this game. Jimmy Greenough, Johnny Giles and Terry Cooper on the other wing. The other change for this game, and crucially, as it would transpire, was a change of referees. Ken Stokes took over from Ray Tinkler, who Tinkler had done all right in what were two very white-hot games, done okay in managing them games. Ken Stokes, well, let's see what how things pan out. The one, I'll tell you what's really interesting when you're looking at stuff like this. You're thinking, I need to be careful not just to look at it through red and white eyes. I wonder, can I find a different source of information about this game? And there's a couple of places I looked, including a number of Leeds players at the time, their autobiographies and stuff, to see what they had to say about this 3-game odyssey, and also a couple of Leeds fanzines. They had some interesting things to say. one of the things I came up with was the Hull Daily Mail. Obviously, we play this game in Hull, and what's the Hull paper got to say about it? The neutral paper, you know. But they reported the next day. I'm just going to quote from the report. That this is what they said about the game. Leeds, with their first cup game v Bologna on their mind, treated everyone to a display of their defensive strength and their ability to break out of it with a minimum of men up front after going ahead through future Sunderland player Rod Belfort on 11 minutes. Now, the last bit's me. It's Rod Belfort scores the goal, and then their tactics change, it would seem. So they've come to play the game. They've come to settle the game because they've got first cup games in the league to worry about. So they do look like they've come to play in the first 10 minutes, but they score a goal. And the master Revy plan is, right, park the bus and let's start working with tickets. So we see after this 11th minute goal, the spoiling, the time wasting, the referee, you know, every decision the referee makes, they're on rotation, sort of challenging. And Stokes, by all accounts, by any account you care to look at, Ken Stokes doesn't do as good a job as Ray Tinkler done. However, 78th minute, you know, it's looking like these tactics are going to work. But in the 78th minute, Alan Gowden had gone on to the left wing. He'd swapped from the right to the left in an attempt to just try and do something different. And he absolutely, Billy Bremner, the reliable Billy Bremner was a great player, you know, and he sort of mistimes a header straight to Gowden, who absolutely half volleys it into the back of the goal for the equaliser. And it's with his left foot. He's a lad who's known for all his play being with his right foot. And after that, the game changes and Sunderland kind of really threatened to take the game away from Leeds. And we were up pressing for the winner when Leeds broke in the last minute of normal time. And again, you don't need to read the northern press. You know, you can read the national press for comments about when Jimmy Greenhoff received the ball, he looked offside when he received the pass from Johnny Giles, and he goes on a mazy run. He's tackled by Cease Irwin, and the ref blows for a foul, you would think, but no, not just a foul, a penalty. In 4 newspaper reports, the next day, this decision was questioned as dubious. It didn't look like a foul. The challenge was not made in the penalty box. and the Leeds player looked offside when he received the ball. And also in these reports, I think 3 of them at least pointed out that when Ken Stokes made that decision, he was on the halfway line and made the decision for the penalty. To add insult to injury, Stokes had missed. Sunderland were up pressing, looking for the winner, and he'd missed a blatant foul on John O'Hare just outside of the Leeds box, just before the broke-up field. Johnny Giles, you know, the decisions taken by Stokes, it's a penalty. There's a bit of furore, a bit of protest. Johnny Giles eventually took the penalty and smashed the ball into the net. He sent Monty the wrong way. But George Hurd, who up until this point in his career, he'd not even been booked, let alone sent off. And he is apoplectic about the decision and protests loud and long to Stokes, and Stokes sends him off. When the game restarts, all hell breaks loose. As luck would have it, there's a challenge made right after the kickoff, and Stokes awards another dubious free kick, and the whole place goes up. The players are arguing with the ref, they're arguing with each other, and the crowd, and within that game, there's a 40,000 crowd at Boothferry Park, and there's probably more Sunderland fans there than Leeds fans, believe it or not, probably. But the crowd is becoming more and more incensed, and some of them come onto the pitch. So the ref leads the players into the centre circle, which for George Mulhall, he was just too close to the referee and he couldn't resist going at him, like giving out to him about the way that he was handling the game. And he let rip. He gets sent off. And the Sunderland manager, Ian McCall, who I've spoken about him before, he was quite his public persona was quite quiet and reserved. You know, he never had too much to say. You never got too much emotion from him. But apparently he's on the touchline, black there, kid, going and doing his nut at what's happening with the game. And there was a comment in one of the papers that he probably, one of the reasons why which wasn't helping McCall maintain his cool, was he was probably being egged on by the sneering Revy who appeared to be watching on with glee as all this transpired. Both players were sent off for using foul and abusive language at the ref, and after the game, one of Sunderland's most experienced players, but unnamed in the report, was quoted to say, "The language from both teams towards the referee throughout the game was shocking. We should have all been sent from the field if that was the case." Sunderland, obviously, they've got 9 men now, and there's just whatever extra time the ref adds on, which happens to be 6 minutes for any time wasting and stuff like that. The police had to clear the field. A number of Sunderland fans were frog marched unceremoniously, where there wasn't any of the current day tactics of negotiating with a crowd invader. You know, these guys were being grabbed a hold of. There was talk of one policeman executing a marvellous rugby league tackle on one of the fans that had gotten onto the pitch. So they weren't hanging about, the whole city police. They cleared the pitch. The regional and national press obviously questioned the penalty decision, and Sunderland manager McCall, he said that the club would be standing behind the 2 players sent off and would be appealing the referee's decision. He also said the club would be considering an appeal to the FA about the ref's handling of the game, and specifically the penalty award. What's behind that is a feeling that the game wasn't straight, that there was something untoward going on in the game. It was a controversial ending to what anybody would have said was a marvellous three-game odyssey. It's got a ring of sour grapes from Sunderland, you know, all the complaints that there were about this from Sunderland. But it was the national press as well as the regional press who were saying, ooh, bit of a rabbit off here. So years later, a little bit of research, years later, I come across something written years later, but obviously by people that were at the game in the Leeds fanzine, the Mighty Mighty Whites. And they declared that referee Stokes awarded a questionable penalty with the prospect of extra time looming. Perhaps he needed to get home to his cocoa pipe and slippers. Marvellous, you know. And then we have these Don Revy's players. Some folk will be aware that a number of these players in books that they've written have dished some of the have exposed some of the things that they were told to do under Revy. And Peter Lerma, he wrote at length about a number of games, and this was one of the games in his autobiography that he wrote about. So he says, Don said, if anybody gets near the box, go down. Jimmy Greenough, who was quick when he got going in full flight, set off on one of his jinky runs and was fully 5 yards outside the box when he went down. By the time he'd stumbled, fallen and rolled over a couple of times, he was inside the box. And referee Ken Stokes, who was still around the halfway line, pointed to the spot, so quickly it was almost embarrassing. This is Peter Lorimer writing. He goes on to say, this was a time when there was a lot of talks about refs being got at. I'm not saying Stokes was, but the issue begged closer examination. Firstly, why did Revy issue that dive instruction before the game? And secondly, why did Stokes award a penalty that so clearly was not? Lots of things were happening in football that simply did not add up, and this was another of these. Jody Mulhall to this day is irate about this. This is decades after Jody Mulhall's irate about it. The Sunderland old boys are 100% sure that this was not a straight game. As a player, you never know. I just remember thinking after the game in the dressing room, that was a really funny statement of Dunn's to tell us to dive. So, despite the controversy, and that definitely was about this game, over 150,000 fans had witnessed the three astonishing and adrenaline-charged games. There definitely were. There was drama in every single one of them games. Sunderland pushed one of the most successful teams in the country to that limit, and despite the defeat, they did earn many plaudits for their performances. These games and the outcome did little to calm the white-hot rivalry that had grown up between the two clubs, and that had probably started with Bobby Collins' break and Willie McPete's hit back in the 62-63 season. As we all know, little more than 6 years later, Sunderland would have their revenge in the 1963 FA Cup final, where Jimmy Monty, who played in all three of these games in 1967, would make his magnificent double save at Wembley to deny a Leeds team that included 7 of the squad that played in that 3-game thrill fest, and obviously included the sneering Don Revy. I don't think he'd sneering as much in 1973, would he?
No, I don't think he would have been.
Yeah. Cup football at its most compelling, that.
Brilliant.
Adrenaline-filled. Bring back the good old days, eh?
I think I was telling the two of you the other day, I'm halfway through the Lance Hardy book about the 1973 Cup run, and a large portion of that first half is about Don Revy and Bob Stokoe and building up their rivalry, I guess, for want of a better term. But there's two things that spring to mind that are pertinent to this conversation that you just had there, Kelvin. One is that there's plenty of suggestion, if not outright accusation, that Don Revy was quite happy to chuck a bit of money here, there and everywhere to get things to go his way. So if that game was somehow impacted, you wouldn't be too surprised if that was the case.
Yeah.
And the other thing which I hadn't realised was how close Revy was to actually taking over as Sunderland manager.
Yeah.
There was a spell where apparently he'd said his goodbyes to the Leeds players that played the game at Elland Road, and everybody expected them to be off to Sunderland. It was all agreed, and whatever happened, it didn't obviously transpire. But it was obviously that to factor in. I can't remember if that was, I think that was before this game.
I don't know about in the 50s when Brown was appointed, but certainly before he was appointed the second time. Yeah. So just after McCall.
After this game,
in between McCall leaving and Brown coming in for his second spell. He was a Marmite character, Revy. I mean, the Leeds fans love him, don't they? I've got a pal who's a Leeds fan, and he won't have a bad word said against Revy. But the words from his own players, in retrospect, looking back, kind of do damn him a bit, don't they? And it was a white hot rivalry, which puts the 1973 Cup final into adds even more to the 1973 Cup final, I think, that all that was still going on. Yeah.
No, it absolutely doesn't. That book has been sat in my bookshelves for years, and I've only just got around to reading it. And if anybody hasn't read that, I can thoroughly recommend it. We'll take another short break there, and we'll be back after a couple of ads.
My day kicks off with a refreshing Celsius energy drink, then straight to the gym. Pre-K pickup, back home to meal prep. Time for my fire station shift. One more Celsius, gotta keep the lights on. When the 3-alarm hits, I'm ready. Celsius. Live, fit, go. Grab a cold, refreshing Celsius at your local retailer or locate now at Celsius.com.
Spring is here, and there's a whole new way to chai at Starbucks that's made perfect for you. Choose your sweetness, dial it up, or keep things light. Add a touch of pistachio, a hint of strawberry, or vanilla, or make it a spring classic with lavender. Because this season, there's endless ways to chai at Starbucks.
Your little one grew 3 inches overnight. Adorable. Also, expensive. Sell their pint-sized pieces on Depop and list them in minutes with no selling fees. Because somewhere, a dad refuses to pay full price for the clothes his kids will outgrow tomorrow. And he's ready to buy your son's entire wardrobe right now. Consider your future growth spurt budget secured. Start selling on Depop, where taste recognizes taste. Payment processing fees and boosting fees still apply. See website for details.
Welcome back to How We're the podcast for another episode of On This Week. Now, Kelvin has just taken us back to the 20th of March 1967 for a look back at Sunderland's second FA Cup replay against Leeds United. And we're going to skip back a day now to March 19th, 1931. Sunderland beat Bolton 3-0 at Roker Park. Goals from Patsy Gallagher, Benny Austin and Jimmy Connor. 1949, Dickie Davis scored a hat-trick for Sunderland in a 3-1 win at Deepdale against Preston North End. And in 1973, also against Preston North End, we also won 3-1, 2 goals from Billy Hughes and 1 from Vic Hallam. 10 years later, in 1983, Mark Proctor made his debut for Sunderland against Swansea. That game ended in a 1-1 draw with Gary Rowell getting the goal for us. And 1994, Sunderland beat Watford 2-0. Craig Russell got both those goals, and David Rush made his final appearance for the club. He came on as an 89th minute sub for Derek Ferguson. I suspect somebody knew that was going to be his last outing. And 2005, a goal from Chris Brown gave Mick McCarthy's Sunderland team all 3 points at home in Coventry. That put us at the top of the table. March the 20th, 1937, Charlie Thompson played his 147th consecutive first team game for Sunderland, which is a pretty amazing record, isn't it? And one that you'd be surprised would be beaten, certainly in this day and age of rotation and all that sort of stuff. 1963, Nick Sharkey scored 5 goals as Sunderland beat Norwich 7-1. That equaled records held by Jimmy Miller, Charlie Buchan and Bobby Gurney for getting 5 goals in a game. 1999, Sunderland beat Bolton 3-1 at the Stadium Light. Kevin Phillips got 1 of the goals and Alan Johnson got 2. Colin Todd was in charge of Bolton on that occasion. 2004, Sunderland won 2-0 against Reading. Darren Byfield and Tommy Smith got the goals. Jeff Whitley was sent off on the 83 minutes and Colin Cooper made his debut for Sunderland. And 2010, we beat Birmingham 3-1 at Stadium Light. Darren Bent got 2 goals and Fraser Campbell got the other. And we're going to move on to March the 21st now. 1908 and 1914, George Holly scored hat-tricks. The game in 1908 was against Blackburn. We beat them 4-0 at Roker Park. Billy Hogg got the other goal. And 6 years later in 1914, that was a game against Everton. We won 5-2. And Charlie Buchan and Charlie Crossley got the goals to complete the scoring after Holly got his 3. 1911, Charlie Buchan was signed from Leighton for £1,200. Seems a good bargain even in those days. 1934, England played the rest at Roker Park. So this was England's first team against players who were in contention for an international call-up. This game was at Roker Park. It ended up England 1, the rest 7. Ray Carter scored 4 for the rest. Bobby Gurney scored 2. Bobby Gurney also hit the bar. And he also had a goal disallowed. So they were both making fairly good claims for international recognition in that game. They might have upset people too much by taking the piss. 1970, Len Ashurst played his 457th first-team game for the club. And 1981, Sunderland beat Coventry 3-0. Joe Hinnigan got 2 goals and Stan Cummins got 1 from the spot. Now, most people's first game is a glorious memory, hopefully a big crowd, a thrilling game, lots of goals and great memories to go home with. Mine happened on March 21st in 1987. I was part of a crowd of 10,250 at Roker Park, me and my dad, and we played Oldham Athletic in the last days of the Laurie McMenemy era. We got beat 2-0. Dennis Irwin scored the goal for Oldham in the first half, and Tommy Wright scored the goal to seal the game 4 minutes from the end. And I was in what they would term the family enclosure for this game. My dad took us into the family enclosure, and it was that like seating area. I was in the middle of the paddock and the main stand seats towards the Fulwell end at Roker Park in the main stand. And whether it was open to away supporters technically or not, I'm not too sure, but there was Oldham fans in the family enclosure as well with their kids. And all game long, I can just remember this Oldham fan in his Lancashire accent shouting for Tommy Wright this, Tommy Wright that, jumping up and down when Tommy Wright scored his goal. And I can remember being absolutely fuming inside. I hated it that he wasn't shouting for Sunderland. And yeah, it took us it took us a year to go back to the next game, but the bug had set in. And I guess the only person who remembers that game as well as I do would be a lad called Mark Outerside, who played right back for us in that occasion. That was his only first-team appearance for Sunderland. So I think Mark Outerside went on to play the concert, which draws that circle quite nicely. But there you go. That was a memorable game, but not for many of the right reasons. 1998, Sunderland beat Portsmouth 2-1 at the stadium by Kevin Phillips and Alan Johnson got the goals. And in 2015, Dick Advocate, who'd just been appointed as Sunderland manager, got beat away at West Ham, went down 1-0 in that game, and Sam Allardyce was in charge at West Ham, which is interesting again when you think about it, that 6 months later, Allardyce would be in charge at the Stadium of Light after we had convinced Advocate to stay during the summer and then regretted it shortly afterwards. Also on March the 21st, Andrew, 1903, and there was a bit of controversy at Roker Park.
Yeah, you could say that. You could say that again, Martin. It was hotly disputed. Just a couple of quick things, if I may, before that. Your first game. I always love hearing stories about people's first ever Sunderland game. I think it can be pivotal how that one afternoon can lead to a lifetime of devotion. Didn't we discover that Tommy Wright's dad was a Sunderland player?
Tommy Wright. That's right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we spoke about Tommy Wright and his background before. And Kelvin, your story about the Odyssey with Leeds, loved listening to it, but it strikes me how I think if you were a neutral, you'd look at that 1973 Cup final as just a bit of a random cup upset. But really, the 73 Cup final, it was the culmination of at least a decade's worth of stories and things intertwining. You had Revie, there was Clough, there was, even Clough's injury when Stokoe was on the pitch. There was, and Stokoe's relationship with Revie prior to them pitching up at Sunderland and Leeds. I just wonder, had we maybe played that final against another big team, it might not have quite panned out in the same way. I think the fact it was Leeds was just this perfect conclusion to a soap opera that had played out without people even noticing it at the time. It fascinates me. And that 67 period that you talk about, Kelvin, there, and let's be honest, it's pretty much it may not have ever been proven, but it's quite clear that something was amiss. It was a huge part of it, and just the fact that it all got tied up in a nice bow at Wembley in '73 is a nice end to it. But even now, even when we played Leeds in 2026, there was a bit of rancor between the two sets of fans. And they're not our local rivals, but they're certainly rivals even now, Leeds, because of all of that. Is that fair, Kelvin?
Well, I think it might be a generational thing. You know, I've got a younger brother who's a big Sunderland fan, and he doesn't quite get my utter dislike of Leeds, you know, and where that comes from. And even though I've tried explaining to him, the thing I would say about 1973 in the cup final, I think that it was Leeds added extra space. But remember, would put Man City out, who were one of the best teams in the country, and would put Arsenal out, who were one of the best teams in the country as well. There was something. The Leeds thing was real. It was there, but there was something else going on as well. So there was something magical about that, something that is beyond logical explanation. The 1973 Cup run, especially when you throw in that book Martin's reading. I think it alludes at times to the absolute certainty that Sunderland fans had that they were going to win the FA Cup, you know. And I didn't know anybody who didn't, any Sunderland fan who didn't think we weren't going to win against Leeds, you know. Now, either that is a blind stupidity, you know, given where Leeds were at, or there's an ingredient in there that you could never quite get your finger on. But Leeds, that was a real white hot thing, that Leeds stuff, Andrew. It was white hot at the time. And as you say, for a decade and more, it was white hot.
There was certainly something, whether you believe this type of thing or not, but it's almost as if there was something in the air, something in the stars, that whole story ended in the way it did. And yeah, that does seem like a certain ingredient. And it interests me, and I'm jealous of Martin, by the way, because that book was fascinating, and I almost wish I could read it again as a first-time reader. It's a fascinating piece. But there will have been neutrals watching Sunderland versus Leeds on the day and just thinking, oh, wow, what an amazing cup story. Oh, well, that's the end of that. But there was so many other layers to it. It wasn't just two teams that happened to meet in the final. It was two teams who seemed to be on this course, but for a long time prior.
Yeah, if you watch, if you watch your FA Cup '73 final video, and you watch the teams walking out with their two managers at their head, you know how what you're used to when you watch them games loads, when you watch the cup final loads, is the two managers are walking out and they're chatting away to each other and stuff like that. There is not a word exchanged between Bob Stokoe and Don Revie. Yeah. If there is, it's probably under the breath and from Stokoe, and he's telling them, you know, because they had history before Stokoe came to Sunderland. Revie and Stokoe had history over a player. I think it was Tony Green at Blackpool. Revie tried to induce Stokoe with money to get him to sell Tony Green to him, and Stokoe's response was pretty typical to that. He put Revie out of his office and was absolutely determined that Tony Green could go anywhere but Leeds. And he ended up at Newcastle. So,
well, there's also the story in the book that I'm currently reading, that where is it? Buried. Don Revie had offered Stoke money allegedly to take it easy.
Yeah.
For a game.
Yes. It's an interesting one that I don't know whether you've gotten into the next. I think in the next few pages of that book it says Stoke was having none of it, and 2 hard-fought draws I think were played with Leeds, and then Leeds won 3-0 at Newcastle. I wonder how much that cost.
Sorry, gents. I do realise I've took us on a massive detour there.
No.
Sorry. Yes. Where were we? 1903, wasn't it? Yes. 21st of March, 1903. Sorry, Martin. You do such a good job of pulling this all together in like a nice fashion, and then I've got and dragged us back over to an.
That's why you need a bit of a structure so we can wander off and we can come back to where we were. So that's fine.
Well, we're back on structure, I promise you. Yeah, it was a defeat at home to Sheffield Wednesday back in the Roker Park, well, the early Roker Park days, really, under Alex Mackey. And don't worry, we're not going to it too much, but Kelvin has already touched on controversy with officials, and I'm going to do similar now. I mean, even in 2026, we're still unhappy with officials and referees. That Bournemouth game recently, was it Jarrett Gillett? He got some absolute stick off the Sunderland fans, but whether he thought he was harshly done
well,
to
my favourite bit about that story from that afternoon was that he got on the train with a whole load of Sunderland fans after the game. So that would have been a very pleasant journey to wherever he was going to.
I did not know that. Bless him. I think if I was him, I would have rather walked than got the train. Like,
no, it's all right. They won't recognise us. And then he asks for a can of Foster's or something on the train, and his cover's blown.
I used to have a period of, I would go and fuel the car at Thompson Road Station, which is only a couple of minutes away from the Stadium of Light, and I had a run of like midweek games. I would always see the referee in there after a League One midweek game, and he'd be fueling his car before the long journey home. And the amount of times the referee was there just like looking absolutely devastated on his face, just like, what have I just encountered there? Just another bad refereeing performance where they've got dogs abuse from the referees. And I must have bumped into 5 or 6 in a row, and their faces were just always of like, oh God, get me out of this town as soon as possible.
But you haven't planned it very well, because surely you'd fill up before the game, wouldn't you? So you made a quick getaway if things went south.
Yeah, well, yeah, there must be something like in the referee's manual. Oh, if you're in charge of at the Stadium of Light, your nearest hotel is this, your nearest petrol station is this, and you need to take, I don't know, you either need to go on Newcastle Road and end up back onto the A19 or the A1M or something. But you're right. It's you'd like to think that maybe they could at least get out of the city boundaries before getting out of the car. But yeah. So even now, referees, bless them, get a hard time. But I think back in 1903, it was slightly, the reaction was a little more extreme. This game had a lot riding on it. Both ourselves and the Wednesday, which is what they were officially known as still. I don't think their name changed to Sheffield Wednesday formally until 1929, I think. They were often referred to in passing as Sheffield Wednesday, but their official name and in the league tables they were announced as the Wednesday. Both the Wednesday and Sunderland were in the title hunt, so there was a lot on this match. We were actually reigning champions as well, so it was a big game, and it was being described by a lot of neutrals as a title decider. Almost. There was a lot on this match. The Sunderland lineup, a lot of famous names: Ted Doig in goal, Andrew McCrombie and Jimmy Watson, Billy Farquhar, who you mentioned him earlier today, didn't you, Martin? A benefit game he had was, yeah. He had a period as Sunderland captain. I'm not sure if he was captain at this point, but he was an influential figure in Sunderland history, to be fair to him. He was playing, Sandy McAllister was, Dickie Jackson was playing, and then the forwards started with a lad called Joe Hewitt, who I must admit is a name I've not heard of loads in Sunderland history. Forgive me if I've maybe overlooked him, but that might be a name I'll read into at some point, because there's not a lot of things I know about him. Up front with him was Whitey Robinson, Jimmy Miller, Jimmy Gemmell, and Arthur Bridget. So those names are a bit more familiar to me. There was no Billy Hogg in the team, and I'll touch on that later. About 22,000 in the crowd, which was 9,000 more than the previous home game, which I think, again, just speaks to how crucial this particular fixture was and how it was being seen as the big match of the day. The game, what we know for sure is that Sunderland lost 1-0 with a goal from a fella called Andy Wilson shortly after the break. But depending on which match report you want to believe, which sources you want to lean on, Sunderland have anything between 1 and 3 seemingly fair goals ruled out by the referee, who was a fella called Tom Armitt of Leek. So I think it's widely accepted that there was at least one Sunderland goal chalked off that was, if there was an infringement, it was minimal. Nobody seems to have understood what the actual issue was. It left to a lot of confusion. But then there was potentially 1 or possibly 2 more other incidents where Sunderland thought they'd got the ball in their net, thought they'd scored a legitimate goal, but hasn't happened. And that has led to what happens at full time, what happens in the final minutes of the game. It gets quite unsavoury. Sunderland fans are just not used to seeing the team lose. They just won 4 on the bounce. As I say, they were reigning Football League champions, so we're in the hunt again for another title. They'd only lost 7 games at home in the last 3 seasons across league and cup. So when you turn up at Roker Park and you pay your money, 9 times out of 10, you're expecting to see a positive result. So there's the shock at Sunderland losing, there's the anger at the way it's happened, there's the nature of the game and what's at stake. I think this is all ingredients that have contributed to tempers flaring. Now, in the aftermath, Sheffield Wednesday players, as they leave the ground, get like a very hostile reception. The Sunderland Daily Echo and Shipping Gazette, a couple of days after, refers to this and says, if Sunderland suffered referees' errors on Saturday, they have probably gained from the same cause at other times, which is something we always hear, don't we? We always hear about the rub of the green, and it'll all balance itself out in the long run. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But the Echo were being fairly magnanimous on that point. But what it then says is, as for the fools who annoyed the Sheffield players on leaving the ground, I can only say that they are the very worst enemies the Sunderland club could have. The visitors played a smart and sportsmanlike game and were entitled to cheers instead of howls. So that's interesting, because it refers to this unpleasant atmosphere, but there's no mention there of violence or anything going too far. It's just a bit of verbals from what you can tell, and listen, footballers have seen that a million times. They're going to get grief off the opposition fans. It's water off a duck's back. But then it's the days after that the story seems to change, and again, depending on which sources you take, the picture then seems to be quite different. Some people are suggesting that the Wednesday players, because they were leaving at the same time as the officials, that's why they were getting targeted, and that there wasn't any issue with the players at all. It was just coincidence that the ref was stepping out the same time they were. There's accusations, though, and suggestions that objects were thrown. So rather than it just being a case of verbals and a case of a bit of rowdiness, it's got physical. But other sources say that when the objects are being thrown, it's got nothing to, there's no Sheffield Wednesday players there at all, and that it's the referee and his other officials, and that they'd actually got away from the ground safely, and they were on a horse-drawn carriage or a brake, as they were known then, but it got as far as Roker Road before they started getting targeted. Now, Roker Road is still there for those who don't know the geography. That's the long road that runs behind what was the Roker end. It starts at one end, like in the area where the actual Roker Park was and the new Derby is, and it goes all the way along to Fulwell Road, the kind of like area where the Cambridge pub is. So it's a long old stretch, and it's not clear at what point on Roker Road the stone throwing happened, or if indeed it did happen. You know, there's all sorts of claims and counterclaims, but a few people are repeating this, that the officials were getting pelted by angry fans, and it leads to an FA hearing on the 8th of April 1903. It takes place at the Grand Hotel in Manchester, and the referee forms part of that. He submits evidence. He reads out a formal report where he again makes an accusation that stones are thrown at him and his colleagues, but that also during the match, objects were thrown at him, including oranges. A number of oranges were thrown at him. Why a load of Sunderland fans had oranges in their pocket, I don't know. But that would suggest to me that it wasn't just one iffy decision. I mean, if a number of fans are throwing fruit at them, that's got to be, you've got to believe that there was more than just the one odd call. There was perhaps, again, a feeling that something's not right here. Sunderland are getting, maybe getting stiffed a bit. So yeah, the commission hears the evidence. Sunderland provide evidence as well. Sheffield Wednesday provide evidence. The punishment is that the ground will be closed for a week. Now, that is major because, as we say time and time again, in that era, you're not paying for season tickets. You're turning up on the day. Gate receipts, gate income is the major earner for the club. We had to pay for the expenses of the inquiry as well. But the fact that we were not going to be allowed to use Roker Park for a home game, that the ground was going to be closed for a period, that was the real kicker, I think. It meant, and this staggers me, it meant that we ended up with like a real Tyne Weir tease affair, because the game that was going to take place at Roker Park then wasn't allowed to be, was against Middlesbrough, and it got moved to St James's Park on the 18th of April, which I bet the police were absolutely over the moon with. Oh yeah, we'll just have a three-way rumble in the middle of Newcastle between Newcastle, Middlesbrough and Sunderland. We actually won that game. We beat Middlesbrough at Newcastle. in what was the penultimate match of the season. But the following weekend, or the penultimate competitive match anyway, we do play a friendly in between. We then go back to Tyneside the following weekend, but we're now the visitors because we're playing Newcastle at St James's Park. So that's another thing that wouldn't be allowed now. The end of the 1902-03 season, our final 2 games were Middlesbrough and Newcastle. I don't think that would, the idea of that would go down too well. But having won there the week previously against Middlesbrough in what was technically our home game, we lose to Newcastle United. Had we won, we would have still picked up the title. We would have still been champions. So that is probably a day that the Mag fans look back on with some pride. You know, the day they scuppered Sunderland's chances of winning the league. But there's still a lot of talk afterwards, not just because we lost the title. This whole business around the Sheffield Wednesday game and the alleged behaviour of some Sunderland fans is, understandably, it's a big talking point in football. It's a big story. I don't think we should ever excuse violence of any level, but there are a few neutral papers, a few national titles, a few local titles. A lot of them are saying that the reports of rowdiness were over exaggerated, and I don't know. Maybe this is me just putting 2 and 2 together, but I don't know. Has the referee had a bad game? He knows he's had a bad game, and just to get himself off the hook, has he perhaps, I don't know, made things sound worse than they were? I don't know. I could be talking out of turn there. I could be being completely unfair, but there is this feeling that maybe Sunderland fans weren't as ill-behaved as suggested.
Yeah.
I found a report by a writer called John Lewis, dated the 28th of March. So this is a little bit nearer to the event itself. This really interested me. John Lewis seems to have been a writer whose work was syndicated because his column appeared exactly the same in a lot of different newspapers. His article, his weekly column was called Football Notes and Queries. And this bloke talked about a lot of the national events, and he talked about the main issues that were happening in football. His main focus in his piece wasn't so much to do with the Sheffield Wednesday game and the behaviour of the fans. He's quite unhappy at Sunderland, though, because he's had a tip-off that we'd approached Tottenham and asked them to borrow a player on loan, a fella called Victor Woodward. We wanted apparently to take him until the end of the season. He felt it was unbecoming of a club who were trying to win the title to do so by borrowing players. He makes the point that it would be fine, say, if a team who were in trouble, like they were trying to avoid relegation or try and stay in existence, he could accept them borrowing players and taking players on loan. But he was very uneasy at the thought of Sunderland, who were at the top end of the table, doing this. This player was an amateur, so would have been allowed legally to do it, seemingly, if he agreed to it. But it didn't sit right morally with this reporter that we did it. Conversely, though, whilst having a dig at Sunderland because of that, he supports the club in other areas. He's really pleased with the stance we've taken over Billy Hogg, who I mentioned earlier. He missed the Sheffield Wednesday game because the club had took it upon themselves to suspend him. That was why they were trying to find a replacement on loan, because the club had suspended Billy Hogg. Now, there's different clippings. I've looked at a few different sources here. There doesn't seem to be publicly a reason as to why he's suspended. Lewis refers to it as a plucky and praiseworthy act on the part of the Wearsider's executive to suspend Hogg, and if other clubs only adopted the same businesslike and manly course of procedure, we should hear much less of misconduct and gross disobedience by players with a reputation. So that's pretty strong. He's not happy at Sunderland potentially loaning a player, but he's happy that they've suspended Hogg for an unknown internal misconduct reason. There's another clipping, another article. William Hogg, the Sunderland outside right forward and international, has been suspended by the directors for misconduct. This is a serious step for the directors to take, especially when the championship of the league still hangs in the balance and is evident that the circumstances were of an exceptional character. It is not yet settled who will take Hogg's place in the team, but this is the second time during the present season that Hogg has come under the ban of the directors, and the announcement has created quite a sensation in the town. Hogg obviously has ongoing issues. A couple of years later, November 1904, he's suspended for 14 days, and that was because of a foul that he made on the pitch. The reason for that was stated publicly. I think one day we'll do a deep dive on Hogg because he was a fascinating character. He's got a real tragic backstory. He's endured a lot of pain in his personal life, but he was also an exceptional player for us. He did a lot of good things for Sunderland. He was a local lad, I believe. Just alongside that, he was a bit of a firebrand as well, obviously. But the Hogg thing interested me because at the same time as Sunderland are coming under criticism from some quarters for the behaviour of their fans, there's also at the same time the club getting credit for standing up and taking a stance against poor behaviour from a player. So that doesn't sound like a club whose reputation is one of being dirty. That doesn't sound perhaps like Leeds, may I say it, dare I say it, who had a reputation in eras of the players and the fans and the club could all act themselves from time to time and upset the apple cart. So yeah, Lewis talks about the Woodward and the Hogg situation. He does have a small line on the Sheffield Wednesday game, and he says he felt that Hogg's absence cost us in this match, and had he played, we could have very well won, and the destination of the title would have been different. It was actually the Wednesday that won the league that season in the end. So this game did have a huge bearing on that. Lewis, in his syndicated column, says, I am a great admirer of Sunderland, both players and management, especially the latter, who, in my opinion, lost last Saturday's match by suspending Hogg. I also admire the spectators there and think they are a more sportsmanlike crowd than Newcastle. Don't know why he's had a dig at Newcastle there, but that will have gone down well, I'm sure. So I was very disappointed at the behaviour of a section of the crowd on Saturday and was glad Mr. Armitt escaped untouched. So again, there's a suggestion there that Armitt, he wasn't perhaps as under threat as made out. Maybe I'm misinterpreting the article there, and when he says Armitt escaped untouched, it doesn't mean that he wasn't under threat and he wasn't attacked, but just that he left without injuries, perhaps. Maybe that's what that's suggesting. But again, there's just always this feeling that maybe, I don't know, had it been as violent as suggested? Listen, Armitt, for his side of the story, for his right of reply, he, in later years, does a column in the Staffordshire Sentinel. And in 1927, he does talk about the day He does talk about it being hairy and him coming under attack via a crowd of what he called roughs. He says a crowd of roughs had waited outside of Roker Park for him. He claimed in this column of his in 1927, which is like nearly 20 years after, he claimed that a couple of weeks prior, a referee had been forced to leave Roker Park disguised as a police officer because apparently fans were unhappy and were after the ref. I can't find any evidence to corroborate that. There is a story in later years of a referee being smuggled out dressed as a police officer, but not that it had happened so soon to the Sheffield Wednesday game. He also claimed that he deliberately left as part of the Sheffield Wednesday group almost as a disguise, almost because the Sheffield Wednesday players had said, listen, you're going to get some stick. Do you want to leave with us and maybe go on as if you're part of our backroom staff? So that was his version of events. Other events were different. There was a lot of conflicting information, but certainly it was an unpleasant atmosphere, and certainly some Sunderland fans do appear to have taken it too far on that day. So there you go. There we have it. We've spoken in the past about times when Sunderland have had to wear black and white on occasion, and this was an instance where, even worse than that, we've actually had to borrow St. James's Park and call it home for a period, all because of the behaviour towards the refs. And some things never change. Refs are always going to be subject to criticism, I think, even like I say, Jared Gillett in more modern times. He might be listening to this little segment and smiling to himself. Just thankfully the reports nowadays are a little bit more gentle as to what the referees have to potentially endure.
I think the referee Armit was leaving with the Sheffield Wednesday fans, Sheffield Wednesday team, to go and get his supper with them. Do you not think, Andrew?
Well, he didn't need supper because he had plenty of oranges. He could have just had a nice bit of a sea boost and gorged on all those oranges that were apparently lobbed at him.
How are you, ref? Come with us. We'll buy your supper for you.
Again, and like I say, if I'm barking up the wrong tree, I apologise. The oranges being thrown on the pitch whilst the game took place, the only reference I could find to that was when the referee was giving evidence at the FA inquiry. That was not covered in any immediate match reports that I read after the game. So maybe, I don't know, it's not quite Paul Gascoigne getting a load of Mars bars lobbed at him, or David Ginola getting a meat pie thrown in his hair in more recent times.
Sounds very true. Sounds like your research hasn't borne fruit, Andrew.
Are you taking the piss there, Kelvin?
Very good. I think you might have given some people an idea or two for the next time Jared Gillett comes to Sunderland. There might be orange sales going through the roof at the local greengrocers, mightn't there? And
it'd be bloody coconuts I'd be buying, I tell you.
Oh, you don't be shy, Kelvin. Come on. We're going to take another very short break there and be back soon.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
They say you should learn something new every day. Like how you should only drink Jägermeister at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, ice cold. Like those frozen cavemen they find, which makes you wonder, what would a caveman think of Jägermeister? Well, if you served it warm, he'd probably throw it in your face, say, "Unga boonga," and storm off. And nobody wants that. So drink it cold or not at all. Jägermeister. Damn, that's cold. Drink responsibly. Jägermeister liqueur, 35% alcohol by volume, imported by Mast Jägermeister, U.S., White Plains, New York.
This episode is brought to you by Subaru. Go further in a long-range Subaru hybrid with up to 597 miles per tank in the Crosstrek hybrid and up to 581 miles per tank in the Forester hybrid. Subaru. Love goes the extra mile. Visit Subaru.com/hybrid to learn more. Range based on EPA estimated combined fuel economy and a full tank of fuel. Actual mileage and range may vary.
Welcome back to Away the podcast for the final installment of this week's On This Week. And we are on March 22nd now, 1952. It marked the end of an era because Len Duns played his final game for the club. It wasn't a very eventful game. It was a goalless draw at home to Preston, but he'd been with the club for 18 years, played 245 games, scored 54 goals. He made his debut as, I think it was a 17-year-old or 18-year-old in the season that we won the title. So in his first season as a young lad, he played 15 or 16 games, has a league winners medal. Next season, goes on to start in the FA Cup final, be part of the FA Cup final winning side. And what a incredible start to a career that lasted for a good 2 decades, Andrew.
Oh, yeah. Great player, great servant. To have a league winners medal, I don't know if you actually got a medal in 36, but to have a league win on your CV and an FA Cup win on your CV is an amazing achievement. It amused me there that we went into Len Duns and his career, because when he retired from playing, believe it or not, in Blandford Street, he ran a fruit and veg shop. So after all of that talk about oranges and chucking stuff at the referee, maybe that's where people got their pre-match oranges from. On the way to the ground, they picked them up from Len Duns's fruitiers shop in the middle of town.
You couldn't have scripted that better if I'd tried to. There you go.
Perfect.
Seamless link.
Yeah.
1986, Sunderland played a game away at Grimsby Town. It was 1-1 draw, and Cameron Duncan made his debut for the club in goal. He saved a penalty from a chap called Andy Pico. I think went on to play for Charlton in the top flight. He saved a penalty on 34 minutes. Gordon Armstrong had scored for Sunderland. Gary Lund had scored for Grimsby. And yes, Cameron Duncan made a penalty save. It was the only league game he played for us. He made 3 appearances in total. He played a couple of League Cup games as well. But that was the only league game he actually played. Andy Dibble came into the side the following weekend, and Cameron Duncan didn't get to play another league game for the first team.
Martin, I would love one time for us to be able to give the pun a deep dive on goalkeepers back then. Because Cameron Duncan makes a penalty save on his league debut, but barely gets a look in otherwise. I believe, sadly, he passed away quite young, but his family...
He did, yeah.
Yeah, his family said he loved his time on Wearside. He really got a thrill by being at the club. But Duncan, Dibble, there was Bob Boulder around that time. I would love at some point to really do a deep dive into just what was going on with goalkeepers in Sunderland's history around that period, because after Chris Turner left, it felt that McMenemy he could not settle on a number one keeper. Bob Boulder, he brought him in, gave him rave reviews, and then I've seen snippets where he could be really critical of him, he could undermine him. This was whilst he was still playing. He would say things in the press that must have just played with Bob Boulder's head. And there was other keepers. It wasn't until maybe Tony Norman that we ever got an established number one again. I remember Dennis Smith even struggled to nail down a first choice number one. So I'd love to one time look at that and try and work out what went wrong, because there was other names, wasn't there? There was McDonough and Hesford and Tim Carter, and
that's right.
A constant rotation in between the sticks for Sunderland goalkeepers at that point.
Which is, it's never the recipe for success, is it? If you're changing your goalkeeper and you're happy with your goalkeeper. And I remember reading that in that pre-season, McManamy was desperately trying to get a good, experienced goalkeeper, and he spent all summer trying to get somebody in. And he was trying to get Pat Jennings to come out of retirement. And Pat Jennings was tempted because he wanted to play in the '86 World Cup. So he wanted to still be around, but he wasn't convinced he should be playing week in, week out. McManamy wanted him to. But Jennings, and he offered Jennings a contract, but Jennings was going on holiday and he wouldn't be back until the end of August, by which time the season would have started. And he wasn't prepared to cancel his holiday to get a year's contract at Sunderland under McManamy. So you had that starting point, which then cascaded into signing McDonough on loan, I think, for the start of the season, then bringing Bob Boulder. I think Bob Boulder was from Liverpool, wasn't he? At the time, he was on Liverpool's books.
And McManamy
goalkeepers.
McManamy made some really unfavourable comments about Bob Boulder in comparison to Bruce Grobbelaar, who he must have been fighting it out with at Liverpool. And this was whilst Boulder was at the club. And you just think, man, what? Like you say, if goalkeepers are a problem position and you've been unlucky not to get your number one target in, why would you then start upsetting the players you do have? It's just, it seems to be so much doubt and uncertainty around the goalkeepers. And like you say, that is not going to lead to anybody coming in and being able to give their best.
Boulder definitely wasn't the rock of our defence, was he?
I think McManamy left a few stones unturned, didn't he? In his search for a keeper. But to be fair to Hesford, he was pretty much first choice, wasn't he, for the 86, 87, and 87, 88 season. And Bobby Mims had a few games in the 86, 87 season as well, didn't he? But Hesford was pretty much first choice, and being kind, that was almost by default because we couldn't get anybody else in.
Correct.
We've talked about Steve Hardwick far too often on this podcast.
Yeah.
He started the 87, 88 season off on goal, and Dennis Smith wanted to make that move permanent. But because somebody said, maybe somebody threw an orange at him in the car park, that's maybe why he didn't sign. But
and he dropped it. He didn't catch it. He dropped it,
and he didn't catch it. Yeah, that might have been his trial for a permanent contract. He failed miserably. Yeah, there we go. But no, it would be a really interesting one to actually dig out the press cuttings, wouldn't it, and go through that period of time, because that is at the root of everything negative I think that happened on the field anyway over the course of that couple of seasons.
Yeah, my sense of that is, if you want to look at the problem with goalkeepers in that period, look at the manager. That's 100%. My sense of that.
McManamy he had Shilton at Southampton, hadn't he? And he'd had good goalkeepers, and it was almost like he knew the value of having a good goalkeeper. Like Brian Clough was never afraid to spend big money on goalkeepers because he knew that was the most important, or one of the most important positions. If you got that right, you can then start building your defence and start building other things, can't you? But if your goalkeeper's leaking, then it doesn't matter how good the players are in front of them. They're always going to come under spells of pressure. They're always going to have to do the basics. And if you can't rely on somebody to do those well, it's going to impact the rest of the team. And, it was just a downward spiral from there on in, wasn't it? But that's a whole other podcast in itself, isn't it? And, once we've wrapped up the year on this week, which is going to happen in a couple of months' time, we'll have done 12 months in 6 or 7 weeks' time. We'll have to start looking for new ideas. So we can do special deep dives on certain topics like that, and fill in a few blanks for people who have blanks that they never knew needed filled in. 1995. Now this was a thing that falls into the category of typical Sunderland. Brett Angel and Dominic Matteo arrive on transfer deadline day. This is when deadline day was the third Thursday of March. Sunderland hadn't spent any money at all, had they, over the past couple of seasons. Mick Buxton had sort of relied on scrapping around the transfer market and signing loan players and pre-transfers and spending a little bit of money here and there. John Ficklin came onto the board and put some cash into the club, and immediately that was spent, all of it pretty much, was spent on securing the signing of Brett Angel. Now, I talked to Brett Angel a few months ago for an article on the website, and he was like, I was injured, I was carrying an injury, I wasn't fit. The opportunity came to come to Sunderland, and I did jump at it, but he wasn't really fit enough to jump, to be fair to him. Dominic Matteo was a youngster at Liverpool, a very promising youngster, and both of them made the debuts in an away game on a Friday night at Barnsley, and Brett Angel had a goal disallowed. I don't think it actually hit him. A long throw went in via the wind. I think it was wind assisted on a extremely windy night at Oakwell. From memory, we got beat 2-0 in that game. Mick Buxton's last game.
Yeah. Wasn't it that day when the Sunderland fans were sat next to a load of loose building materials, and just, if you could ask for an example of the pain of supporting Sunderland, it's seeing your new striker fail to score whilst your ineligible lone player plays, all whilst sharp sand is getting whipped into your face. And just, I mean, that is supporting Sunderland in a nutshell, surely.
Well, it was a spoiler alert there, because after the match, it transpired that Dominic Matteo hadn't been registered properly and he had to go back to Liverpool, which caused a problem immediately in terms of team selection, because we did need some competition and some strength at left back. But also had a lingering problem of potentially causing a points deduction, which, you could argue that he didn't help us win any points, so why should any be deducted? But, it hasn't gone unpunished before in that respect. As a fielding an ineligible player has often led to a points deduction, and somehow we talked our way out of that, and it's fortunate we did, because with a couple of points taken off our tally that season, the task that Peter Reid inherited could have been an awful lot harder, couldn't it?
Yeah. Martin, is it possible that purely the fact that Sunderland hadn't signed many players of late led to the problems with the paperwork? Could it have been something as simple as that, like, we just weren't used to doing the admin side of things because we were so, like, frugal and unable to spend in the transfer market? Or am I just...
Maybe the fax machine had broken down.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm maybe
in them.
Yeah, maybe I'm being oversimplifying things there, but I don't know.
Well, what you might be onto something, because it says the club failed to fax the registration forms to the league headquarters, which would seem a fairly basic part of the process of registering a player, wouldn't it, in those days? I'm sure it's all done digitally now with different things, but yeah, you had to fax it through. Everybody knew that, didn't they? And we got away with a fine of $2,500 rather than any points deduction, which again was pretty fortunate in how that season turned out. 2 years later, Chris Waddle, who we talked about earlier, made his debut against Nottingham Forest. He took a corner, didn't he? And Kevin Ball scored at the full end to put us 1-0 up early in the second half. But Des Little, I always despised Des Little for this, scored an equaliser. I still maintain Lionel Perez should have saved it as well. He couldn't dive full length to save anything, Perez. But Des Little, for such a limited player, to score that goal, I still don't like him. 2008, Sunderland beat Aston Villa 1-0. This was Roy Keane's season in the Premier League, where he kept us up with a good run of away form. I think we won at Fulham, didn't we? Which sent Roy Hodge and Doolally. And we also picked up all 3 points at Villa Park against Martin O'Neill's Aston Villa, with Michael Chopra getting the goal. Well, I think that rounds us up for this week. Been a ton of stuff that we've gone through there. And Andrew, do you have a question to leave people with so they can ponder on something that we'll delve into next time we record?
Yeah, I do. Good episode that. I liked that one. But yeah, here we go. Next week, 23rd of March to the 29th of March we're going to be looking at. Now, on the 23rd, 1974, Alex Lockie, I think he got referred to as both at various points. He was a centre-half for Sunderland who'd made his debut in April 1937. So he will have been a teammate of Len Dunn's. Maybe got a bit of a discount at the old fruit and veg shop, bit of a mate's rates when he went in there. He passed away, sadly, 23rd of March 1974. But what I would like to know, please, is which northeast town had he been born in?
There we go. That's a bit of a toughie this week.
Well, he was a player who was on the books for a long time, gents. But he's one of these ones, again, we talk about potential deep dives if the format changes. And we often say we'd like to look at how wartime football impacted a lot of lads' careers. Bless him, Alex Lockie was one of those whose football and his professional career was absolutely ruined by the outbreak of the Second World War. And it means that a lad, he's from the Northeast, he's a local lad, he was on the books for a long time. He perhaps doesn't have the memories and the name that somebody who was at the club that long should have done. So we'll have a little bit of look at his career next time. But if anybody knows, if you could drop us a line and just tell us which town he was born in.
Excellent. Well, all that is left for me to do is say thank you very much, Andrew.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Cheers.
And thank you as always, Kelvin.
Cheers, guys. Cheers.
And we will be back tomorrow as we begin the build-up on How We're the Podcast to the small matter of a little game that's taking place on Sunday. And we'll have podcasts every day as we look forward, if that's the right word. We'll put that in inverted commas, as we look forward to that game. And, of course, there'll be a ton of stuff on rokerreport.sbnation.com as well. But until next week, it's goodbye from us.
Shot clocks, big shots, upsets, aces. TGL playoffs are here. First, Atlanta Drive starts their repeat run against Los Angeles Golf Club. Then, Rory's Boston Common Golf and Tiger's Jupiter Links face off in their playoff debuts. Who will advance? Keep up. It's playoffs. Tune in Tuesday, March 17th at 6:30 p.m. and 9 p.m. only on ESPN and the ESPN app.
Find the biggest voices in sport on the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Like The Upshot with Jack and Zach. It's a podcast about the scandalous antics of the biggest names in sport. From David Beckham's stag do of the century to the real reason Chelsea sacked Thomas Tuchel. This summer, we'll be in the USA, unearthing all the funniest stories from the biggest tournament in sport. Search The Upshot wherever you get your podcasts.
Sports Social Podcast Network.